Hi, today we're going to test a very interesting lens. This is the Viltrox AF 35mm f1.2 lab lens. So let's see what it can do. Viltrox has been making lenses since 2009, and while it's primarily known for its affordable lenses, it has also started a new line of premium lenses called Lab. This currently includes the autofocus 135mm f1.8 lab lens that was announced in 2024 and the autofocus 35mm f1.2 lab lens that we shall be reviewing today, announced earlier in 2025. The lens includes 15 elements in 10 groups with 5 ED elements, 3 HR elements, and 2 UA elements. The lens is coated with a multi-layer nano coating to reduce ghosting. The lens is made from a magnesium-aluminum alloy and feels very robust in the hand. The lens measures 12 cm long and has a diameter of 8.9 cm. It weighs in at just over 900 grams, which is certainly a lot, but still a little lighter than the Sigma 35mm f1.2 DG-DN art lens.
The lens has two rings, a very smooth front focusing ring and a narrow aperture ring with deeper grooves. The aperture ring moves in a nice audible clicks and is relatively easy to turn. In declick mode, it is extremely smooth. The lens has an autofocus manual focus switch, a click-declick switch for the aperture, and two assignable buttons, more on those in a moment, as well as a top screen that provides real-time information on the aperture, focus distance, and depth of field, as well as information on the focus mode and the function buttons. The Viltrox Lab line is one of the only lens lines on the market to have a supported app. On the Lab line, this is done via built-in Bluetooth on the lens. Having an app allows for easier firmware updates and a great deal of personalization. We use the Viltrox Lens app for Android, and while you must register with a phone or an email, the installation itself was simple and fairly quick. For some reason, Viltrox does not list the names of the lenses to choose from, and to us it would make more sense if the app would just connect and recognize the lens on its own. We tried to update the firmware on our lens without success in several different ways until we connected it to power via USB, and then it worked fine. It would be great if Viltrox would add an option to work with the app when the lens is connected to a camera. In the app, you can change the function of the two function buttons, including focus lock, A to B focus presets, toggle the display on and off, and change the startup text or image. Viltrox markets the lens as having a high-grade sealing design for dust and splash resistance. The lens comes in an E and Z full-frame mounts. We'll be testing the E variant. The lens has a petal-shaped hood measuring just over 4 cm or 1.5 inches in length. The Viltrox lens is equipped with an 11-bladed aperture. Finally, the lens has a 77mm front filter thread. Moving over to performance, and we will start with focus. The Viltrox uses a quad-hyper VCM autofocus system that is designed to be fast and silent. The autofocus speed of the lens in our studio tests seemed to produce great result in both speed and accuracy against stationary targets. On moving targets outdoors with our Sony A1, however, the autofocus accuracy was not on par with our Sony 35mm f1.8 lens, especially when the subject got closer to the camera. We also tested if the Viltrox lens has linear focus throw, and just like most fly-by-wire lenses, it does not. It would be interesting to see if Viltrox can somehow add this feature into its app. We tested the sharpness of the Viltrox and the Sony 35mm f1.8 lenses using our image test chart with a Sony a7R5. The Viltrox is surprisingly sharp in the center, wide open, especially for an f1.2 lens, and you only gain a little bit of sharpness and contrast closing down to between f1.8 and f2.8. The corners are a different story, and you need to close down to between f4 and possibly f5.6 to get good sharpness. Just for comparison, the Sony 35mm f1.8 is not as sharp in the center, and you need to close down to between f2.8 and f4 for maximum sharpness and contrast.
Just like the Viltrox, you will also need to close down to between f4 and f5.6 for maximum corner sharpness. Moving over to close-up performance, the official minimum focus distance of the Viltrox is 34 cm, although in our test it was able to achieve only 36.5 with autofocus turned on. The official max magnification is 1 to 5.8. For comparison, the Sony 35mm f1.8 has a much closer minimum focus distance of only 22 cm with a slightly better max magnification of 1 to 4.2. In the center, close-up, wide open, the Viltrox looks sharp and you can see improvement in contrast between f2.8 and f4. Looking at the edges of the frame close-up, we see a different picture. Wide open and up to f4, the image isn't sharp, and even at f5.6, the image is not fully sharp. The Sony 35mm f1.8 that can focus much closer also doesn't look that sharp wide open, but much better at f2.8 and beyond in the center. The corners of the Sony start to look better at f4 and are pretty sharp at f5.6. This lens is definitely a better choice for close-up work. The Viltrox does have visible breathing, especially at close focusing distances. The Sony 35mm f1.8 is a surprising lens in this respect, with fairly little breathing, even when the breathing compensation is turned off. In our test, the Viltrox didn't show any significant longitudinal chromatic aberrations wide open, and closing down to around f1.8, the lens looks perfect and visibly better than the Sony at that aperture. The Viltrox has a ton of purple and green flare wide open without the hood when in direct light. To be fair, the Sony 35mm f1.8 is also not exactly clean, although not quite as bad. Wide open, the vignette on the Viltrox when the in-camera corrections are turned off is extreme. Closing down to f1.8 brings the visible improvement, and a big improvement is shown between f2.8 and f4. What surprised us is that the Sony 35mm f1.8 looks worse at f1.8 in terms of vignette compared to the Viltrox at f1.2. And although it also improves as you close down, it's not completely gone even at f5.6 and still lags behind the Viltrox in this respect. With the in-camera corrections turned off, the Viltrox 35mm appears to have very little barrel or pincushion distortion, and so does the Sony 35mm f1.8 for that matter. Interestingly, the Viltrox looks to be a tad wider than the Sony. Looking at the bokeh of the lens at f1.2, in the center of the frame, the bokeh balls looks large and round and are fairly clean. As you move away from the center, they get the familiar cat's eye look, although when you close down a little to around f1.8, they are pretty much gone and are fairly similar to those made by the Sony 35mm at f1.8. Here are a few images that we took with the Viltrox 35mm using our Sony A1 and A7R5 cameras. Please note that we had experienced some strange behavior with our lens, especially on the A1, where we had to remove the battery and reinsert it again to regain control of the camera, but this might be due to the early nature of the copy of the lens that we had. So let's conclude. The Viltrox 35mm f1.2 AF lens is an exceedingly ambitious undertaking by the Chinese manufacturer. Considering the fact that even Sony itself does not currently make an f1.2 35mm lens and that Sigma is the only one that even tried this, certainly shows how high Viltrox is aiming with this lens. But did this bet pan out for Viltrox? There is certainly a lot to like about the lens. It has a good build quality, nice features like the D-Click and USB-C for firmware updates, and even some nice bonuses like the top screen and app. Maybe most importantly, the sharpness of the lens, even wide open at the center, is good, and closing down a little make it exceptional. The lens also has very low chromatic aberration and a really pleasant bokeh and a little to no geometric distortion. The lens does have some important downsides that you need to be aware of. Its corners sharpness is not great and you will need to close down quite a bit to improve it. The lens does have a great deal of flare, and its minimum close-up distance and corner sharpness could be better. In our test, the biggest drawback of the lens was the autofocus accuracy with our Sony A1, especially versus moving targets at closer distances. All in all though, if you're looking for a wide-angle lens that can provide impressive background separation with very good center sharpness at a fairly affordable price tag, the Viltrox 35mm f1.2 should be on your shortlist. Just keep in mind that its autofocus still needs some work. Finally, pricing. The lens currently sells for just under $1,000. So that was our look at the Viltrox 35mm f1.2. You can check out the full review with all 5 test results on LensVid.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to find more videos just like this. See you in the next video.